Good morning. Welcome to episode 97 of the Driller Newscast, a weekly update on the news and stories impacting the drilling and water industry. I'm your host, Brock Yorty. This week's episode is brought to you by Derek's Drills. Based in High River, Alberta, Derek's manufactures exceptional dual rotary drilling rigs for the whole world. Using our many years of drilling experience, we've engineered the perfect drilling rig for your water well, geothermal, and reverse circulation exploration projects. Our customer service and technical assistance are second to none as we take great pride in customer satisfaction. Your success is our success. Hey, everybody, jump over to the Derek's website. That's DEREX.ca and check out their two newest rig editions. This is the Derek's 2630-22 Matthew and the Derek's 2630-22 Arthur. Thank you, Derek and team, for thinking outside the box and supporting the Driller Newscast. Episode 97 will be focused on clean energy and sustainability. This week in the news, we're going to start by hearing a quote from COP28 President Sultan Al-Jaber. Next, we will highlight the 23 states in the U.S. that have clean energy initiatives with the Clean Energy State Alliance. Finally, we'll wrap up the National Renewable Energy Laboratories report and subsequent article that were released on February 12th. For our feature this week, we're going to talk with Scott, founder of the Decarb New York event, and how him and his team create a single-day networking event that touches all pieces of the investment into sustainability. Let's jump right into the news. For this week in the news, I think it's important for us to start from a global perspective on sustainability, go into what's going on in the United States, and then talk about the research and the discussions that are had about heat pumps and investment into sustainability. So we're going to start with COP28. This happened in December, and it was a hot button discussion because the event took place in Dubai, and there were many pieces back and forth over 2,200 fossil fuel lobbyists there. There was a lot of focus. We can see from country to country, how do we wean ourselves off of fossil fuels and what is the viability? And so on February 12th, COP28 President Sultan Al-Jaber said that bringing the energy sector to the table at the UN Climate Summit that was hosted by Dubai in December made the action agenda more meaningful. Here's his quote. "History will remember that this was the first COP that agreed to transition away from fossil fuels." He continues with, "The World Government Summit in Dubai had representatives from nearly 200 countries that agreed at COP28 Climate Summit to begin reducing global consumption of fossil fuels to avert the worst of climate change." Jaber said that in order for the UAE consensus agreement to get traction, serious action was needed. "We need to show that an unprecedented agreement can be turned into unprecedented action." This is a big deal, everybody. We're looking at how greenhouse gases are impacting our planet and the climate. And we've covered this many different ways on the newscast, from looking at the Greenland ice sheets to, the extreme weather and impact to groundwater. And this is another piece. He continues, "We are what we do, not what we say." I do believe it was unconventional to host COP28 in the UAE. And Sultan Al-Jaber went on to admit that the UAE is increasing its oil capacity to 5 million barrels per day by 2027. But he also states we produce less than 1/5 of the largest producer of oil in the world, that being the United States. Our civilization has been promoted and advanced through our drilling and our mining and being able to have water, discovering the unknown. Of course, the United States industry is founded on oil, and we have to recognize that. And so I know many of us have this discussion, but when we look into the numbers in 2022, the US produced almost 18 million barrels daily, which was 1/5 of the world's oil supply. In 2023, the US produced more than 13 million barrels of crude a day, which is more than any other country. The Energy Information Administration expects US crude oil production to increase to record heights in 2024. At COP28, we saw 200 countries agree to transition away from fossil fuels. Let's shrink this back down to the United States now, everybody. In the US, there are 23 states, along with Puerto Rico and DC, that agree to these goals, with having zero emission goals completed by New Jersey's lofty goal of 2035 to all the way up to the 2050s. Following states have plans, and they can all be found in the Clean Energy State Alliances. Those states are California, Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Louisiana, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, Nebraska, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, New York, North Carolina, Oregon, Rhode Island, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. What's wild, everybody? We got to think about this. Those states are 53% of our population. And we've seen this as we've discussed extreme weather versus climate change versus net zero to zero emissions. Those states' populations, 53% of our country. That's 177,556,992 Americans. In the list of the states, we got the three biggest cities in our country: New York, LA, and Chicago. They all have goals and expectations. However, it's a big year for us, and everything that's been done at COP28 as we go into 29 and 30, and we think about our goals here in a country, saving our planet, reducing, not breaking that 1.5 degree Celsius threshold, we can see that how it breaks down in Congress as I read off those 23 states. We had number 1, California, for House seats. We had number 4, New York. However, there's no commitment by number 2, Texas, or number 3, Florida, or number 5, Pennsylvania. And that's something we have to think about. Our long-term federal strategy currently is to be zero emissions by 2050. How are we going to do that? This comes directly into our discussion that we're going to have with Scott today about Decarb New York. We have Decarb DC coming up, and then Decarb Boston. And a big piece of that is investment into sustainable buildings, not only new builds, but existing buildings, because we got some great architecture out there. We got to figure out how to bring that together like we did at Decarb New York by touring the Heinz building and all the great things that are going on there, and the focus. A big piece of this is going to be heat pumps, specifically ground source heat pumps, and thermal energy networks. Just last week, February 12th, the National Renewable Energy Laboratory released a report titled Benefits of Heat Pumps Detailed. And it's their new report. First paragraph states, millions of US households would benefit from heat pumps, but the cost of installing the technology needs to come down to make their use more attractive proposition. This came from the research of this, according to the U.S. Department of Energy's National Renewable Energy Lab and the Building Technologies Office. The article, which is a summary of the report, Heat Pumps for All? Question. The distribution costs and benefits of residential air source heat pumps in the United States. The lead author had a quote, Eric Wilson. There are millions of people who would benefit from putting in heat pumps, and there are incentives made available through the Inflation Reduction Act, both tax credits and rebates, that millions of households can benefit from. But what this paper shows is that there are still millions more households for whom the technology is still pretty expensive, and we need to work to bring down the cost of installing heat pumps. That cost is going to come from more data, collaboration, and education. The report went on to state, nationally, the researchers calculated heat pumps would cut home site energy use by 31 to 47% on average, depending on its efficiency level, and 41 to 52% when combined with building upgrades such as better insulation. The big difference between energy savings and energy cost savings is because natural gas prices are much lower than electricity prices on a BTU basis in many parts of the country. The housing characteristics that had the largest bearing on savings were the heating fuel type and the presence of air conditioning. That's about 49 million homes that use electricity, fuel oil, or propane for heat and have air conditioning. That's 92 to 90%, 92% to 100% of homes would see energy bill savings with a median savings of $300 to $650 a year, depending on heat pump efficiency. Finally, the report states nationally, heat pumps would cut residential sector greenhouse gas emissions by 36 to 64%, including the emissions from new electricity generation. Go to nrel.gov and read both the article and the report. We often talk about this. What is it going to take for the cost to be reduced? It's going to take education. It's going to understand that we just saw Canada burn for 9 months. It's going to be a collaboration from Europe and the Scandinavian countries and Canada and us all coming together and realizing that as one, learning from one another, we can progress this industry. From a drilling perspective, as you're watching this, I'm about to hear Scott talk about Decarb New York and the focus for the future. I want you to think about one thing. We're going to do thermal energy networks to share the cost to reduce this. We need more downhole data in test wells. That means not just a test well that is a hole bored into the ground and we look at some cuttings and then we do an in situ thermal conductivity test. I want a good subset, let's say 5% of an entire bore field as test holes. And of that 5%, I want geophysical logs. I want to be able to look at resistivity. I want to be able to look at the three-dimensional idea of the subsurface, from the confining layers I punch through to the permeability to what the final depth is. We're having way too many situations in drilling right now where we don't know if we're drilling a gypsum, a fractured shale, and then going into granite. There's many places where we could do better at this. Now let's get on to a great discussion with Scott. For this week's feature, I'm very excited because, we have lots of discussions on the newscast about geothermal and extreme weather, climate change, and impacting our environment, and how important it is for drilling and building, and all of these pieces coming together from JEG to Karen Eubank to IGSPA. And in the middle of this, I got this great opportunity to talk with Scott, and you can see he's on with us right now. And I ended up in New York City, in Greenwich, at the Heinz building with all of these great industry leaders and finance individuals and real estate individuals and engineers and drilling companies. And we had this wonderful day of collaboration. And so I'm going to open it right up. Scott, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Brock, for your valuable time and for this interview. So my name is Scott Donachie. I'm the CEO of CNZ. We run meetings in New York, DC, Los Angeles, and Boston for people that are really committed, probably the hardest working people committed to climate change, and really coming up with demonstrable solutions to mitigate climate change. And we focus on buildings, so decarbonizing buildings. I'm really excited to have this chat with you and look forward to unpacking a lot more about, how we can collaborate and help each other. Yeah.
And you bring a fresh perspective to this. What inspired you to get into sustainability for buildings?
Well, I'll kind of answer this as a two-part question, but 6 years ago, I started the company and I was in banking for years. I ran hedge fund meetings. I got let go of my job 6 years ago and transitioned into sustainability after doing research. And I found out where I live in New Jersey, there's over 600 dormant landfills where I live. And, having kids that are teenagers, I was concerned about that. So I worked pretty hard in the waste and recycling side of the industry. And then about 14 months ago, with local law 97 and being right outside of New York City in New Jersey, really saw a lot of the legislation that's getting pushed for localizing these efforts, and a lot of movement. So I pivoted towards the built environment and real estate, and it's been fantastic. I really like the architects, the engineers, and all of the banks and all of the corporate tenants and the REITs and everyone that we're working with. It's just such a nice ecosystem of people. Yeah, so that's how I moved over to the real estate side. Yeah.
And so that jumps right into New York City, our largest city in the country, 10 million people, lots of busy things going on. And I find myself last month sitting in this brand new building connected to 100-year-old building, and they're making it sustainable, and you bring these folks in. So how did you start the CNZ membership in New York City? What chose New York City? You said obviously you're in New Jersey, but how?
Yeah, well, I think it's such a monumental task. There's 50,000 buildings in New York City, and with local law 97, many of these buildings have to get upgraded. I also find too that retrofitting buildings is the most challenging, but probably the best for the circular economy and circularity in the built environment. So even though it's a really challenging task, I feel like there's so much potential to really help a lot of the corporate tenants, the landlords, the building owners, and everyone really understand. And I think a big part of this is I like to say calming the fears of the unknown through education. Because if you're educated, you can measure, what you want in terms of a building and where you want to move towards, and just take those initial first steps. It really mitigates a lot of that fear that seems to be in the market today. And it's really exciting. So yeah, that's how the transition happened. Yeah.
It's the time I get to spend traveling Europe and looking at geothermal and the adoption there. And you've had some individuals come in that may have started in the States, but now work in the Netherlands and whatnot. We're really good at tearing buildings down and making new, but we have these gorgeous buildings in New York City, and you mentioned Boston and DC and even Los Angeles. And it's that's been our biggest hurdle, is how do we make this viable for those style buildings?
Yeah, it's really a big challenge. I mean, I'm talking to different, industries, and if you look at data centers or you look at hospitals, it's just such a daunting task, with the amount of energy that they're putting out and then the tenants that they have. You can imagine like retrofitting a hospital, how challenging something like that may be. But what I really like about where we're headed, and I call it kind of like the mini Canadian invasion, There are a lot of people from Canada that are coming to our meetings. I think we had maybe about 35% of the attendees and speakers at the last Decarb Summit were from Canada. So it's really exciting because there are people that are meeting each other for the first time. And what also really gets me excited is seeing a banker meet with someone who's an engineer and they're working on very complicated projects, and for people to really stretch themselves and learn things that are outside of their wheelhouse, whether it's financing, a building, like what's the financing that's available. And then on the other side, for a banker to come in and learn about geothermal, and there seem to be a lot of misperceptions with geothermal. And I think by bridging that gap through education, we can really move things along. And the financing end of it is monumental and so important, because if the financing isn't available, we can have all the plans that we want, and these projects are not going to get off the ground. Yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And so you've had an event in New York, and you had an event last year in New York, correct?
Yeah, we had several events in New York last year. Yeah.
And so now you're branching out into these other cities. And I mean, DC and Boston are also very old cities and very important and very historical. And then heading off to the West Coast, what can these cities learn from New York?
Well, I think a lot of the people in New York, right? I call it kind of a baptism by fire, but they've jumped in, they've gone into these buildings. Some of the top consultants are in New York City and advisors. So they can bring a lot of these pilot programs and case studies. And then what we want to do is people learn from other cities and replicate the work that they're doing. So it's quite interesting because every city has a little bit of a different um, kind of carrot and stick when it comes to policy. New York might be a little bit more punitive versus, let's say, Boston, at local law 97 versus Birdo. And then there's a totally different, lens as well in DC with BEPS and with a lot of the compliance that's going on in DC. So I feel like collaboration between the cities is extremely important, and bringing in all the right players in the ecosystem. So you have the policymakers, you have the building owners and the developers. And then I think a really big part of what we're working on is the corporate tenants. They're in the buildings. People are getting back to work. There's a lot of fear out there with the zombie buildings, obviously, and leases coming due and things. But the corporate tenants also are really going to drive a lot of these initiatives. So we find that there's different challenges in every city, but if people can come and then learn from each other, it's going to expedite and accelerate the decarbonization efforts for these different buildings and portfolios.
What I've enjoyed with attending Decarb New York, and obviously I'm lucky enough to come to Decarb DC later this month. Uh, there's such a great group of members and folks coming together. And unlike other events I've been to, this is fast. You pack in a lot in a single day, and we're standing for lunch, and there's so many conversations going on that I feel like we're in this renaissance mode of collaboration. And that's going to put me right into, what makes the CNZ members so unique and successful. It's a everything's buzzing at lunch, and then we all sit back down and we're in these amazing conversations again. It's fun.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I think I'll make an analogy, but I really enjoy martial arts. So I used to study martial arts years ago and things, and like that whole sport has evolved right over the last 30 years. And I feel like the people that are most effective, and this goes for a lot of things in sports or leadership or good organizations that really understand how to move things forward, learning from others again that are outside of your wheelhouse, and taking people are taking notes at our meetings. So they're sitting down, they're taking notes, they're learning. It's drinking from a fire hose, and it can be quite exhausting at the end of the day. But I think the big thing is we want to also like build these deep, personal, meaningful relationships so that people can be comfortable and understand. You can come to our meetings and you can really start unpacking. Well, what were the issues that you had for, let's say, permitting on a big geothermal site? And it was, 3 or 6 months it got put off and the project didn't happen. Like we want to learn from these successes as opposed to a 20,000 foot view. Everything's great. We did this project, pat us on the back, give us an award. Like, that those days are over. We need to get down to business, bring in people that are really committed, and not just push out sustainability reports that look really great for marketing. We need to bring in people that have demonstrable solutions, and then they can learn from each other. And I think one of the other really wonderful parts of the business and the way it's headed is we have people that are sustainability is a little bit different than banking, but they're frenemies or they're people that work together and they're collaborating and they're sharing ideas of how to get these projects done. And I think that's what really makes it, an honor to work with everyone. Yeah.
So, last question. This is the Driller Newscast, and obviously, most of our listeners and engineers and whatnot, drilling is a way of life. And we see nothing happens in this world without some sort of investigation of the subsurface before we start. And you've had some pretty big companies come up. Can we talk about those guys? I mean, it's pretty neat what we have and the inspiration it is to see drilling getting its spotlight shined on it.
Yeah, I think on the drilling side, what's really nice, I had a conversation, kind of this is the way it started back in July of 2023 with a gentleman, Jared Rodriguez. So he consults with NYSERDA and does a lot of amazing work. And he said to me, Scott, why are you not in thermal energy networks? And I said, wow, this is interesting. And it opened up a whole different lens of electrifying buildings. Everything that I was looking at was above the ground. And then I had conversations with Subterra. They're providing a lot of the financing for these big projects. And then you get into, the people that are the engineers that are working with us. So we had JBB at our last. We had, some of the top engineering firms that are Salas O'Brien. So it's really humbling to work with a lot of these engineers, and then the drillers that come along, like yourself, or the people that are really specialized. And I think there might be, just speaking to you as well, a migration from the oil and gas industry over to this side of the industry for drilling, because there seems to be, I'm not going to say a lack of talent, but there's a lack of like really qualified people that can come in quickly and assess a site. And I think there's a really good opportunity for a lot of the drillers to collaborate and come in and learn from the beginning how these projects get started, how do they plan them out. We're measuring for the footprint of the building, the carbon. We're looking at the waste, waste heat recovery, the overall water consumption in the building. Everything is very holistic, if you will, almost like the human body, right? And I think it's really amazing where the drillers plug in because it's so important to have someone who's really, qualified. When I started this, talking to people 8 or 9 months ago, immediately Googling boreholes, and it's just kind of funny. And now I feel a lot more comfortable talking about, boreholes, if you will. So, yeah.
It is very interesting. There's so much demand for drilling from the federal infrastructure law for new buildings, for water infrastructure, for highways, uh, pipelines, other pieces that are happening. And we don't like the pipeline word with sustainability, but it's a necessary means of running our industry and it is core. And so we got great drilling companies out there. It's just between new municipal water wells and PFAS and all the new information we need to be able to build bigger highways and bridges and whatnot, that sometimes geothermal just gets, lost in the shuffle. And so it's great to see you bringing these folks in. Anything else you'd like to add to what we've talked about today? We got a couple minutes left.
Um, no, I would just say, I think the whole focus on, having the growth mindset of getting better all the time is really what it's going to take to move forward. Um, I'm a big like fan of David Goggins. He runs these 100-mile races and I think that's really what it takes in this space to make a difference is constantly failing and moving forward and learning from your mistakes and having that intestinal fortitude to go in and maybe you have to call somebody, a dozen times throughout the year. Maybe you have to call them 100 times throughout the year. But if you get that person that can come in, a lot of the people that are coming in now are from Europe that are coming into our meetings, and they're able to give a completely different lens of what's happening with drilling. Whether they're from France or they're Denmark, or we've had drillers come in and I think it's really interesting how it's localized, but then it also has a global educational level. And combining those two is really going to move things forward. And the people that have a growth mindset and kind of can embrace, and lean into the pain, because it's very painful when you're making a transition to something new and having to, upgrade 50,000 buildings just in New York. But if you can lean in and learn from other people, then we're all going to be much more effective in this whole journey. Yeah.
Love that. It's a marathon. And just the same as thermal networks, ground source geothermal, what we're doing here, the global economy for drilling, it's very easy for this side of the industry to get a little scared about, well, wait, what do you mean the folks from, France are coming in? Or wait, what do you mean these guys from northern Canada or the oil field? But that collaboration, no different than what you're asking of everybody in this day sprint of all these great meetings and discussions, our drilling community getting more adoption by being able to tell DC that, hey, wait, we've been doing this all over Paris, or hey, we've done this in
Mm.
another in Milan. That type of stuff allows us to have the credibility to go, yeah, we can pull some drill rigs in and go right around the Washington Monument. This will work out.
Yeah, exactly. No, exactly. Yeah, no one likes to be like someone had a really good line in one of our meetings, and it was pretty obvious, but no one wants to be first in sustainability, and no one wants to be last. That was actually Ben Myers, said that from Boston Properties, and I thought that really resonated with me. And it's true, right? It's true that in life with many things, but especially with something disruptive. Yeah,
Well, thank you for your time today. I know you're a busy man, and I actually
yeah,
snagged a little bit more time than I could from you, and I appreciate that.
yeah. Thank you, Brock. It was an excellent interview, and I look forward to working with you.
Thanks, Scott. As always, it's great to hear about strategic collaboration and the promotion of drilling and installing ground source thermal networks, installing loops. There's a lot here. And we need rig innovation to get there. So a huge thanks to Derek McGlattery over at Team Derek's for supporting episode 97 of the newscast. They do not get to choose the content. They are supporting that we're bringing you the latest news, content, and discussions that our industry needs to have. And Derek McGlattery and team have always been great at going, Brock, we love what you guys are doing over there and we want to support it. So let's support them. Jump over to their website, derex.ca, and check out all of the innovation they have going on. Give them a call. I hear he's got a geothermal rig coming out next. I can't wait to see what it is. Check out thedriller.com for the latest news, discussions on innovation, and content created by professionals in the industry who find time to give back as columnists. So a lot to unpack. And we as an industry have to realize our part as drillers, which means pulling back the curtain and being a great team player and collaborator with the client, the general contractor, the engineers, and the individuals that are running these bore fields. Through collaboration and education, we can do better. Joe Parsons with Climate Control Group says it best. Brock, we've had plenty of time now with great incentives, including these most recent ones in the Inflation Reduction Act that go through 2033. We need to come out of this in the 2030s as a sustainable, standalone heating and cooling, renewable energy industry that has 80 years of life in the ground. I couldn't agree more. Go out, be safe. Thanks, everyone.